I always really enjoy the process of disassembling our formwork and seeing how my concrete's turned out underneath. The first thing I have to do is add rebar to this hollow block. I then repeat the same process. We want to push the concrete into all the deep corners and crevices, a block wall complete.
Close the door and leave the light on. The morning light should be coming soon. Kick off your shoes and leave the winter and the pain it brings to you. Lay your head upon my shoulder. Shut off your thoughts and clear your mind.
In our previous episode, we finished pouring all the concrete for our step foundation. This step foundation is a key part of the entire system of what we're creating here. It's not just for the steps, but it's also the foundational element that locks in the retaining wall we'll be building later, and the stone terrace walls for the blood orange tree. This morning we're going to rip out the formwork for this steps behind me, and later today we'll get the blocks started on the wall. This retaining wall that goes on the side of the staircase. I always really enjoy the process of disassembling our formwork and seeing how my concrete's turned out underneath. Here I'm removing one of my pre-formed panels. It's a really convenient way to create large flat sections in my retaining wall systems. Most of these timbers will be reused as we continue the stone wall around this corner. After removing all the timber forms, I always inspect the concrete to make sure it's come out the way I planned before we start building on top of it. The next part of our process is to add our hollow block elements. For engineering purposes, we're tying the very first step in our staircase with hollow block into the retaining wall that runs up to the side of the staircase. This will add a lot of strength to the whole system and lock the retaining wall into the foundation. I'm doing a rough layout of how the grey hollow block is going to form the first step and tie into the first split face block that's going to form the retaining wall. The grey blocks we're using for the step will be covered with pavers and bricks later, but the split face block will remain exposed. After being satisfied the hollow block's all going to fit together as planned, we need to make some cutouts in the block so the reinforcement bar can fit between. I need to cut out slots or notches in the hollow block for the rebar to be able to pass through it. Most of these cuts can be made on the wet saw. After cutting the notches, I return the blocks to the dry layout position. This way I can keep track of where I need to put the notches in the next block. The limitations of my wet saw don't allow it to cut the center crossbar of these blocks, so I finish these off with my hand grinder, then return them to the position ready for the rebar. Once the rebar's in place for the first course of hollow block and tied together, we can add the second course of split face block for the retaining wall side. I'm also adding the bottom corner block of our natural stone wall as a way of tying it into this whole retaining wall stair foundation system. Then I fill the hollow block with concrete to create the first step in our staircase. With the leftover concrete, I continued some of the natural stone elements around this blood orange tree. So yesterday we got the first two courses of this block wall, and today we're going to put the third course up. The first thing I have to do is add rebar to this hollow block, as obviously you can't add the rebar once the block's on top. I custom cut the rebar to size with my grinder as I need them. I start this third course with a dry layout to make sure all our blocks are going to line up as needed. I'm also double checking that our concrete foundation we poured lines up properly with this third course. The concrete foundation was designed to sit slightly lower than needed, That way we could just add a packer underneath one of our blocks to bring everything up to the right height. So I'm just making sure that this is all working. All these hollow blocks will need slots cut in them, as we did earlier with our step blocks. Hollow block can be purchased with slots already cut in it, ready for rebar, and I often use those type of blocks. But in this case, we're using the leftover blocks from the wall I built on the previous project, so these all need custom slots cut in them. I gently tap out the concrete with my hammer to create the notches. Then we finish off the cuts with our hand grinder and return them to the wall, ready for our next course to be laid on top. You may have noticed that these hollow blocks have large notches cut in the back of them. That's so when we backfill this wall with concrete, we can add rebar in to tie it together to make it really strong for the large stone retaining wall that'll be on the front of this corner. I then repeat the same process for the next course of hollow block. I'm making a few adjustments here with my grinder to fit this picket in as a piece of rebar for the top of this wall. This picket will add a lot of extra strength. I've also prepared more stones for the natural stone wall that goes around the blood orange tree, because whilst we're mixing concrete for our hollow block wall, we can add a bit more concrete to this structure and keep it continuing on. I'm using my standard concrete mix of 6:1 Portland cement added to gravel and sand premix. I've also added bondcrete in to help it adhere to the concrete block. I'm trying to add this concrete as gently and carefully as possible, as the hollow blocks aren't attached to each other in any way. It's just gravity holding them in place, so we don't want to bump them out of alignment. Once this concrete sets up with the rebar, all the blocks will be locked together, but at this point they're still quite vulnerable. With the first bed of concrete in place, we need to agitate the concrete. Here I'm using a piece of rebar. We want to push the concrete into all the deep corners and crevices of this block to get a really good adhesion into the system. We also have to be quite gentle with this process, as we don't want to bump our blocks out of alignment. As we add more concrete, the wet concrete will hold these blocks in place quite firmly. But as we add the first layers, we've got to be extra careful. Here you can see me agitating the concrete around our rebar and pushing the concrete out of the slots we cut with our wet saw. This is all part of ensuring the concrete works its way through the whole engineering system. Once a batch of concrete's worked in thoroughly, we add more on top and continue the process.
Started past my time and felt sorry. Can't trust the feel unless you see how much I will and won't do for you. Can you tell me if that will do? If it won't, then you tell me, then I start again. I will without any hesitation. I'm lonely.
With the concrete pour of the hollow block wall complete, we used the leftover concrete on the natural stone wall around the blood orange tree. I'm using the same technique as we used in the construction of one of our natural stone walls earlier in this series. This is just on a smaller scale. We have the forms set up, holding the stones flat, and then we're going to backfill them with concrete to lock them in place. Before continuing this stone wall any further, we have to deal with some of our drainage issues. We need to continue a drainage system we installed in a previous project underneath this gravel pathway. You've got to manage the water flow, as the walls can act like little dams So by adding a drainage system, we can direct the water to flow downhill where we want it to go. In an earlier episode, we excavated and trimmed off this pipe. Now it's time to reconnect it and direct it underneath our staircase into the new garden bed we're creating. I'm assembling some PVC plumbing parts so we can direct this plumbing underneath our timber retaining wall where we're going to be building this small stone wall. I'm pre-assembling this small piece of pipe which will be long enough to get us under this wall, using standard PVC primer and glue to join them together. There's 2 drains that I trimmed off earlier. One of them is being left open as a kind of watering system for this garden bed, but the main one we're redirecting underneath this staircase into the new garden bed we're creating. I backfill the ditch just to complete the installation of this pipe, and then we'll be able to move on to continuing this small stone wall. The natural pink granite stone that we're using to build the terracing around this blood orange tree is a theme that we've carried out throughout this entire project. We started incorporating the pink granite in the previous retaining wall pathway project. This is all part of an entire garden, terraced, stepped pathway staircase system to resolve an unmanageable hillside into a functional garden. With the drainage complete, we can finish off the small garden walls around this blood orange tree. We've been constructing these small stone walls the same way we did the walls underneath the deck. The challenge with the construction of these stone walls was having to work around the existing blood orange tree and the small space we have to work in. To complete this wall system, we have to make an adjustment to our temporary path boundary. Using my spirit level to mark the angle, I'm cutting our sleeper material with my reciprocating saw. We'll be joining the final piece of treated timber onto this cut later on. I'm adding a timber form that we'll replace later with treated timber. But for now it'll help us build these stones on the right angle so it lines up properly later when we add the treated pine. As we've done throughout all these wall systems, we're backfilling with pigmented concrete and then adding our stones on top. I take my time with this process as these stones are highly exposed. I'm spending a lot of time on which stones I select and how I place them in the wall.
You told me all the time I'd have no chance. I'd say I wouldn't have if you weren't there. But we didn't make the most of it. So we'll make the rest the most of all we can.
I'm also adding gravel chips between the gaps in the stones to give it a nice rustic finish. This completes the small stone walls around our blood orange tree. In the next episode, we're going to return to the staircase and start cladding it in pavers.
I want to be happy. Never give up the way we feel. I'm lonely. I'm not lonely.
Thanks for joining me this week on my YouTube channel. Check the link below, and while you're at it, hit the subscribe button or make a comment so I can help you with your future construction solutions. And don't forget to follow our channel for more ideas and how-to tips for home and garden projects.